Well, welcome back to the channel. Well, in all the legacy kinds of devices that I review and cover and talk about, old typewriters and film photography and whatnot, I don't really get a chance to delve into new products that much. But there's an interesting lens that just hit the market recently. This is the TTartisan's 40mm f2 in L-mount. And I bought one direct from TTartisan's from China. It arrived probably about a week and a half later, and I'd like to do a little review of this lens. I haven't done a real lens review before of a modern lens. So we're shooting on a Panasonic Lumix S5 II. That's the camera I've been using for most of this year. And the lens that we're shooting on is the Lumix 35mm f1.8 lens. I'm going to be comparing this TTartisan's 40 against the Lumix 35 at f2. So the 35 will go down to f1.8, but I'm going to compare both of these at f2 and then maybe at f5.6 and a few f-stops in between. We're going to cover a number of different parameters of this lens, see how it compares to that lens, so stay tuned. So this is an L-mount lens. L-mount is a new digital camera mount that Leica started a few years ago and incorporates like their SL2 series mirrorless cameras. There's an alliance between Leica, Lumix, Panasonic Lumix with their S1, S5, and S9 full-frame bodies. And also Sigma, which is a Japanese lens manufacturer, is also involved in the L-mount alliance. So this is my first L-mount lens that wasn't Panasonic Lumix. So in case you're not aware of this, in the last couple years, Chinese manufacturers of lenses have come really high up in quality very rapidly. There's a number of manufacturers making really good optics and good build quality lenses for, in this case, this lens is less than 1/4 the cost of the lens you're looking through now, the Lumix 35. And there are other manufacturers like TaiPoc, a Chinese lens manufacturer, who are making replica Leica rangefinder M-mount lenses that are like replicas of old Summicron and other classic Leica lenses for pennies on the dollar with really pretty decent build quality. So let's take a look at the TTartisan's 40 f2 and see how it compares to the Panasonic Lumix 35. So here is the box that the lens comes in. TTartisan's autofocus 40mm f2 in L-mount, black lens. Has a user's manual and a warranty card. The packaging is pretty nicely done. So let's set aside the packaging. So here is the lens with its lens hood and lens cap. So the rear body cap is a smart cap. So these mirrorless camera lenses have electrical contacts that communicate to the camera body. And in this case, this body cap has a USB-C connector right here. So if the manufacturer has a software upgrade for the firmware of the lens, you can attach the body cap and plug this into your computer and transfer that upgrade file to the lens if there is an upgrade sent out. So again, almost all of the mirrorless camera lenses have some kind of software in the lens that tells the camera body what the brand of the lens is, what the focal length is, and what the current f-stop setting is. So that gets us to the fact that this lens is all metal. The lens hood is all metal as well. And the lens cap right here, of course, is plastic. And there's the front. It takes a 52mm filter thread. Minimal focal distance is about 0.4 meters, 40 centimeters. We'll talk about that later. One of the notable things about this lens compared to the Lumix lens is this has a manual aperture ring, and it goes from f2 to f16 in third of a stop clicks, and it is a clicky aperture ring. You can't declick it. And then beyond f16, there is an automatic mode where the aperture will be set by the camera body, just like it is with the Lumix 35 lens. I really like the manual aperture ring. I like being able to just look down at the camera as it's hanging off my neck with a strap and being able to tell what my aperture is without having to turn the camera on, which is pretty nice. Now, there's one thing I don't really like about mounting this TTartisan's lens, which is these lenses have a dot indicating the index mark. This Lumix lens has a very prominent red dot. It mates up with this red dot on the lens mount, so you can easily get it aligned and mount it. But on the TTartisans, that red dot is cryptically hidden right on the edge of the lens mount ring and kind of hard to see. So it's not as easy to notice. The other thing I'll say is once you attach the lens hood, which goes on nice and snug, getting the front lens cap on and off is a little bit of a faff. The angle of these two little squeeze things is just not very optimally designed, and they're kind of short and shallow. So a lot of times when I'm out in the wild trying to put the lens cap back on, I'll just tilt the camera up. I'll just drop the lens cap in here, and then I'll try to get it fitted. That's about the only way to reliably get the lens cap on there. So it's not quite as good as some of the other camera lenses I've seen. Well, that is the lens. It is actually a pretty nice looking lens. It has good aesthetics. It feels good in the hand. Metal build quality. Let's look at some specs about it. Well, these are the two lenses, the Lumix 35 f1.8 on your right and the TTartisan's 40 f2 on your left. You notice quite a bit of a size difference. So minus the hoods and lens caps, the Lumix 35 is 83 millimeters long. The TTartisan's is 43 millimeters long. The Lumix is 72.7 millimeters wide, and you can see it gets wider toward the front of the lens. The TTartisan's is about 63 millimeters wide, but that's really the widest point is back here at the flange. The main body of it is narrower than that. Weight comparison, the Lumix lens is 296.2 grams, minus lens caps and hoods. The TTartisan's is only 169, so like almost 300 versus 170 grams. So quite a bit lighter for the TTartisan's and quite a bit smaller, as you can see. So the Lumix lens has a manual focus, autofocus switch on the side of the body, and it has a fly-by-wire focusing ring, but it does not have an aperture ring. The TTartisan's has a fly-by-wire or focus-by-wire focus ring here. No manual auto switch. You have to switch the autofocus on the camera body itself. And it has this manual clicky aperture ring, which the Lumix lens doesn't have. Now, what's interesting about this, with the lens disconnected from the body, if you look through the lens, the aperture is actually not closing down. So this aperture ring, even though it's manual and it's clicky with 1/3 f-stop clicks, it's really just electronically telling the camera body what it wants the aperture to be set to, and then the camera body tells the lens what to do. Otherwise, if it was a direct aperture connection, you'd be able to see the aperture manually change as I move the ring. Okay, so the TTartisan's 40 is a 9-element in 6 groups lens, and one of those is aspherical, and one of those has extra low dispersion, and 2 of them have high index of refraction. Comparing that to the Lumix 35, which is 11 elements in 9 groups, 3 aspherical and 3 extra dispersion elements. So a little bit fewer elements in the TTartisan's versus the Lumix. And also, if we're talking about lens design here, I should mention that in the L-mount Alliance, Sigma also makes a couple 35mm focal length lenses that are in this same general focal length category. In fact, I believe they make 4 35mm lenses, but the one that's closest to this is going to be the 35 f2 Sigma. That's 10 elements with 9 groups, 2 aspherical elements. So let's look at lens performance now, starting with false color. So what I've done here is I've set up a black and white silver gelatin print of mine. I've illuminated it using 5,000 Kelvin balanced LED lights, and I've set the white balance on the camera to 5,000 Kelvin. So the image on the left is with that print photographed using the Lumix 35 f2 lens, and on the right, the TTartisan's 40 at f2. And it looks to me like the Lumix lens is a little bit warmer tone. The TTartisan's has a little bit cooler of a tone at the same Kelvin setting, same white balance. And I would attribute the difference to the difference in the coatings on the glass elements. So now let's look at center sharpness. So I've photographed a metal mesh screen that's on the front of my courtyard gate. And the top two photos are taken with the TTartisans at f2. The bottom is the Lumix 35, also at f2. So the two left-hand images are the centers of each image. And you might be able to tell that they're pretty sharp. I think the Lumix 35 probably has a slight edge on the TTartisans at the center. And then if you go over to the two images on the right-hand side, the Lumix 35 in the corner is noticeably sharper than the TTartisan. So the Lumix 35 is a better corrected lens than the TTartisan's 40 at f2. This is wide open at f2 on the TTartisans and f2 on the 35 Lumix. So now this is a similar test using the same subject, but the lenses are now set to f5.6. So center detail is on the left. The Lumix 35 at f5.6 is the bottom. The TTartisan's f5.6 is the top. And I think in the center detail, both lenses now at f5.6 are really hard to tell the difference apart. But on the right-hand two images, this is a corner detail. The Lumix 35 still has an advantage as far as corner sharpness, even at f5.6. So I give the edge to the Lumix lens for sharpness. So here's another sharpness test. This time we're looking at a decorative wall in the Old Town Albuquerque area. On the top are the TTartisan's 40mm images. On the bottom are the Lumix 35 images. On the left are those two lenses at f2. On the right are those two lenses at f5.6. And these are in the center of the image. In this bright light, I see slight differences in the center, especially at f2 between the two lenses. But by f5.6, it's pretty minor difference. They look pretty sharp in the center. And here is those same images in the corner, upper right corner. So TTartisan on top, Lumix on the bottom, f2 at the left, f5.6 on the right. I do see some difference in the corner, especially at f2. The TTartisan is softer. And also you can again see some of the difference in coloration between the lenses. The bottom two images from the Lumix lens appear a little warmer. The top two images from the TTartisan appear a little cooler. So next, this is the bokeh test at f2. So this is looking at the quality of the out-of-focus parts of the image, which is known in Japan as bokeh. So the TTartisan's 40 at f2 is on the left, the Lumix 35 at f2 is on the right. So what I've done in both of these images is I've focused on a foreground part of the tree or part of the shrubs in the lower right corner, and then the upper left quadrant on both images is out of focus. And to me, it looks like the Lumix 35 has that kind of slight cat's eye shaped bokeh to some of those blobs of light. In fact, there's a little bit of the circular swirly bokeh going on with the Lumix 35. Whereas on the TTartisan's 40, I don't see as much of those kind of characteristics in its out of focus image, but it is nice and soft. There's no real harshness to it. I think it's a pleasing, soft, out of focus image on the TTartisans as well. So next, I want to look at light fall off on both lenses. So this is focused on a flat, evenly lit surface. The TTartisan's 40 are the top images. The Lumix 35 are the bottom images. And starting at the left at f2, you can see both the Lumix and the TTartisans have significant vignetting, but I think the TTartisans is a little bit heavier at f2. By f2.8, they're both starting to clear up. The TTartisans is slightly heavier. By f4, they're better, and then I think by f5.6, it's really hard to tell the two lenses apart. So significant vignetting or darkening around the outer edge on the TTartisans at f2, but the Lumix has a bit of that as well. So this may or may not be impactful to your style of photography based on whether you like to have vignetting in your images. So this is the TTartisan 40 in a autofocus test. So I'm out on a city park and I'm just moving around. I'm moving myself around the field of view. I have subject detect autofocus set. So I'm just seeing how the camera lens combination reacts to me moving in and out of the focus area. Does it latch onto the background, etc., etc. So this is the Lumix 35 lens at the same autofocus test, just seeing how it tracks focus on a moving subject in video. It looks like it tends to latch onto the background fairly often there, I'm seeing it. But keep in mind that this lens has a wider field of view than the 40. So next, this is a tracking autofocus test. So I'm using the TTartisan 40 at f2 and I'm running toward the camera, kind of running back and forth in and out of the focus box just to see if it tracks me during focusing. And this particular test, it looks to me like it tracked okay. As I got closer to the camera, I saw the background trees get steadily more out of focus. I didn't see any hunting back to the trees. It looks like things were steadily tracking me as I got toward the camera. And this is the Lumix 35 in the same autofocus tracking test, and it looked pretty good also. I didn't really see too much really bad hunting or anything, although it kind of looked to me like maybe the Lumix was slightly slower to respond when I initially started going close to the camera. But they're overall pretty good, both lenses are, for focus tracking. So here I wanted to test the autofocus tracking by tapping the back of the screen between a near object and a far object. And also I'm looking at focus breathing. This is the TTartisan 40 at f2. So as I tap back and forth between the tree and the background, you can see it responds quite quickly and it doesn't seem to stick or get hung up either way, but there is a little bit of focus breathing. Look at the edge of the image as I focus between the foreground and background. So this focus breathing is noticeable if you're focusing like this while you're shooting video. It's not really an issue with stills photography, but it could affect video shooters. So here's the minimum focal length test on the Lumix 35 f1.8 lens. So it looks to be around 22.5 centimeters. Okay, now the minimal focal distance test for the TTartisan 40. And this looks to be around 41 centimeters, 410 millimeters. So almost twice the minimal focal distance of the Lumix lens. So now I'd like to talk about the differences between these two lenses and how they relate to you as a photographer or a videographer. Regarding the usability, the Lumix 35 has better close focus ability, and it has the auto manual focus switch, which makes it a little bit more convenient. You don't have to dive into the menus if you want to go to manual focus or whatever. It's just right there. It has less focus breathing, virtually no focus breathing. So if you're manually focusing in video, that's probably a benefit for you. And of course, the Lumix lens does not have an aperture ring. I think for still photography especially, having the aperture ring is very, very useful. So that's a plus for the TTartisan's lens. So one of the big drawbacks, I think, that I've noticed with the TTartisan's lens is its minimum focal distance of 40 centimeters is just a lot longer than the minimum focal distance of the Lumix lens. And it really means getting those kind of close-up shots of things that you might want. It's just harder to do with this lens. But this lens is certainly much smaller than the Lumix lens, and it's lighter as well. Now, I do like the style of the lens hood that comes with the TTartisan's lens, but I don't know how effective it is in really bright light. I did take quite a few scenic photographs with this lens and body, but let's take a look at some of those photos now and see what you think. So we're shooting right now. We're recording through the 40mm f2 TTartisan's lens at f2. In fact, I've been using this lens for about the last month or so with all my videos, and you haven't even noticed probably. Usually, although before I got this lens, I was using the 35 f1.8 at f1.8. So I have to move the tripod back a little bit to get the same angle of view because it's a 40 versus a 35. So this lens is an interesting lens for a number of reasons. It doesn't have the absolute optical quality of these well-corrected Lumix lenses, but it has some aesthetic differences. It's a better looking lens. It's lighter, has that clicky aperture ring, which is really nice. I think the TTartisan's lens is really well optimized, well suitable for more like street photography, documentary photography, a run and gun go lens, but not as sharp on the edges of the image as the Lumix 35. And it does vignette at wider apertures, although for my style of photography, that's not as much of a problem because I tend to like to have a little bit of a vignette on the edges anyways in a lot of my photography. But I think the real place where this lens shines is in its less than 1/4 of the cost of the Lumix lens with a lighter package, better aesthetics, metal build quality, clicky aperture ring. That's really its use case. So a couple caveats. This lens is more sensitive to flare. If I turn on these yellow lights again, can you see it? Yeah, you can see that flare, the veiling flare around there. So it is sensitive to that, so be aware of that. And then the minimum focal distance is quite a bit longer on this lens, 40 centimeters compared to the Lumix lens. So that is a significant difference for you if you like to get up close to stuff out there and photograph it. Not necessarily macro photography, but just close-up photography. This is going to limit you more. And so this TTartisan's lens ends up being more like your classic street photography camera lens, more optimized for further distance shooting. I'd like to hear from you if you have an L-mount camera or are considering one, and are you interested in this lens? Maybe you have the lens already. Let me know down below. Let's talk about the L-mount mirrorless cameras, Panasonic and Leica and Sigma lenses, and what do you think about that? And until next time, I wish you the very best in your creative pursuits. Have a great day. Bye-bye for now.